Well, hello everyone, Shadow Rita here. Hello Lady Sif. I decided to do another one today. Wasn't expecting to, but there you go. It's the take with Sophie Ridge from yesterday. It's got Mark Harper, the Transport Secretary, the new Transport Secretary, Pat Cullen, the College of Nurses, the Nurses Union leader, and Louise Haig. Now, I quickly need to. I've forgotten exactly what she's Shadow Minister of, so 2 seconds. Shadow Secretary of State for Transport in the United Kingdom. So, we've got the Transport of State and the Secretary of Transport of State on.
With Sophie Ridge.
Once again, all you have out of me at the minute is audio, but I'm sure the sound is up for you guys. If I'm talking, I'll try to pause it so you guys get as much of what they're saying as possible. Warning: my rats are running around behind me, so please don't get too distracted. I will be distracted, trying to make sure they're not getting up to no good. But yeah, this is One Angry Pagan, Shadow Rita, and this will be my reaction to the take with Sophie Ridge from Wednesday, the 20th of Æfterra, the 12th. So,
live at 9 here in the heart of Westminster. Now, it's our first take of the new year, but really the same story. There's another ambulance strike today, with more nurse walkouts due next week and doctors balloting right now for their own industrial action. All of that in a health service that does seem on the brink. Meanwhile, one rail union boss put the chances of a deal that would call their strike action off at zero. So we'll be talking to one man at the centre of the dispute, the Transport Secretary, plus we'll have an exclusive interview with the head of the Nurses Union and takes from all sides over the next 60 minutes.
His response to the greatest crisis in the history of the NHS is to threaten to sack our nurses.
Well, Keir Starmer pretty clear there who he blames for the strikes in the NHS, but Rishi Sunak said they were a risk to the public.
What's terrifying is that right now, people not knowing whether when they call 999, they will get the treatment that they need.
Meanwhile,
and whose fault was that in the first place, you fucking dickhead? This was happening before the strikes.
The Scottish National Party wanted to focus on the special investigation by SkyNews into money in Westminster and called for reform of the system.
Today, let's reflect upon numbers, and in particular, those numbers which were shone a light on by Sam Coates of Sky.
Well, we'll bring you that call for change and the latest of our special reports from the Westminster accounts. And we're going to be focusing on the NHS with our viewers panel as we try and find out more about the state of the health service across the UK. You can see them all there. We'll be talking to them a little bit later for their takes. Plus, we'll have exactly the interviews that you need to hear this evening with the Transport Secretary, Mark Harper. The General Secretary of the Royal College of Nursing, Pat Cullen, will be here with us, and the Shadow Transport Secretary too, Louise Haig, plus much more besides on the take. Hello, good evening. It's an absolutely packed show this evening. I don't know how we're going to fit it all in, but we're going to be focusing on the strikes that we've been discussing. Plus, we'll bring you the very latest on the big project here at Sky News, bringing greater transparency to money in Westminster that was given top billing by the SNP at Prime Minister's Questions today. The party says there must be root and branch reform. Well, let's start, though, with the best bits of the week so far.
Sky News and Tortoise Media have launched the Westminster Accounts, which is a major project designed to shine a light on how money flows into politics.
Over £17 million. That's the total amount of outside earnings that MPs have declared in the course of this Parliament.
You know, the more transparency, the better.
I think transparency is really important.
Do you think that it is helpful to pull all this stuff together?
Yes.
In one database?
Yes.
We're talking about the elite of the UK Westminster establishment here, and all of them have got fingers in different pies.
We begin with breaking news, and talks to avert further NHS strikes in England have broken up today without an agreement.
What they want to talk about is productivity. Productivity, when our members are working 18-hour shifts.
They let the strikes go ahead over Christmas. They didn't lift a telephone or lift a finger to get them off.
Now, the government has formally tabled its anti-strike laws in Parliament.
Will in the end cover 6 sectors, but it will be focused mainly on blue lights, as they call it.
The ambulance strike plan for tomorrow still do not have minimum safety levels in place, and this cannot continue. Prime Minister, all we're saying is that in these emergency services, patients should be able to rely on a basic level of life-saving care.
Yes, Rishi fucking Sunak, yes, they fucking should. But I will reiterate, this shit was happening before the strike started.
There's not a
all of us have got short memory, you bellend.
The NHS.
We can see there the debate dominated by the NHS strikes, but lots on the rail strikes as well.
I think this is Warden's Day,
those union bosses giving evidence today. And a little earlier, I spoke to the Transport Secretary, Mark Harper. I just want to start with the Sky News tortoise investigation, Westminster accounts into money in Westminster. Now, the SNP are calling for root and branch reform. Do you think the system needs it?
No, look, I think the thing that's come out of that to me is that all of this money that people get is declared, and it's all publicly available for people to see, and then members of Parliament have to account for, you know, where they take donations, where they earn income from outside. Then they have to, it's all publicly available. They have to be able to be transparent about, you know, what they've taken, what they've been doing for it, and that's how it works. And and ultimately, in our system, if voters don't like it, they can boot them out and get a new member of Parliament.
I guess,
No, there is that's actually a lie. The only people who can boot Tories out of office are the Tories, and they have to be MPs or the Prime Minister.
Where everyone agrees is the need for transparency, and that more transparency.
She should have challenged that.
It's got to be a good thing. One proposal that, for example, Eric Pickles, the Conservative peer chair of the sort of watchdog on second jobs, has suggested is that every donation should perhaps be registered under someone's actual name rather than a company that people may or may not know who's behind it. I mean, is that the kind of thing that could be looked into?
Well, I'm very happy if people want to look at some of the detail. I mean, I think it is important that people know if MPs do some outside work and that doesn't get in the way of doing their job as an MP. I think it's important that MPs know what their primary job is, which is to represent their constituents. But if they do something else, as long as people are clear about who's paying for it, you know, and what work they're doing, and we've obviously tightened the rules up. Have been tightened up on that over recent years, then I think that's absolutely fine. And ultimately, it's for MPs' constituents to look at the job they do, look at the information that's declared, and make a decision at election time about whether they want to keep them.
And I guess the more information, the better.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. No, so I mean, I think if we look at proposals like that, those are ultimately for Parliament rather than for government. But you know, I think if people want to look at those and bring proposals forward, then obviously.
Right. And how often have you guys ignored that over the last 13? Let alone 13 years. The last fucking 3 years alone. Fucking prick.
People will look at them in an appropriate way.
Let's talk strikes. Transport Secretary, of course, you've had a busy few months, shall we say. Now, Mick Whelan, the General Secretary of the ASLEF Train Drivers Union, today said that the possibility of a deal that would, of course, avert strike action in the future was zero. What would you put it at?
Well, look, I'm not going to put a number on it, but I thought it was a bit unfair because since I met Mick Whelan, I mean, he made a perfectly reasonable point when I met him, which is that his union hadn't been given an offer yet, and obviously you're not in a position to talk about it. So, I mean, actually things have actually moved on. He's had an offer. He's in a position now where his union can sit down with the Rail Delivery Group, which represents train operating companies, and talk through reform, talk through the money, and there's at least the basis for a conversation there. So, what I've tried to do since I got this job was I met the unions, I've tried to change the tone of the conversation so that we're coming across as more reasonable, and I made sure that improved, reasonable offers were made to the trade unions on behalf of their workforce, and we've made some progress.
Okay, maybe not. It's not complete bullshit. However, it is still somewhat bullshit. The offers made still demanded driver-only operations, which is unsafe. I don't care what the bosses had to say yesterday. I've spoken to people on trains. I grew up around this shit. A few times I've been able to go out and travel. When I've been on the trains, I ask people what it's like. My dad works at St. David's. I asked them what it's like. They don't like it. It's unsafe. One of the biggest safety concerns for me is they want to cut down safety maintenance inspections by a whole 50%. I'm sorry, fucking what?
Yes, on Network Rail, the TSSA, their leader was one of those giving evidence at the Select Committee today, and Unite have settled with Network Rail, so we've made some progress.
The thing is, though, you mentioned the TSSA there. I mean, what the RMT would say to that is that they didn't have the same issue when it comes to job losses and changes to their working conditions. So it was easier for them to strike a deal.
Well, look, these are the sorts of things that have to be thrashed out. But part of the offer that have been made is partly on pay, partly on conditions, but also there have been some guarantees now about no compulsory redundancies for a period. But it's for the unions now to talk to the employers and thrash out the detail. And I accept those details are important, but they've now got the space to do that.
I get that you were trying to change the tone to come across as reasonable, as non-confrontational, but just a couple of things to pick up on in what you're saying. You say you want the unions to be neutral. Do you think that they are not being neutral then?
No. All I meant was it's technical term. It's just the RMT, when they put the first deal to their members, they recommended their members reject it.
And
so
that's part of their job.
Trying to get to, we're realistic to think they probably won't go as far as necessarily recommending it, but we at least want them to put it to their members and say, look, here's a deal, you decide what to do, we're not going to tell you what to do, and let their members make a decision based on all the facts.
I'm sorry, but the union representatives get given a mandate by the members as to what to fucking negotiate on. He's spouting lies here. Either that or he just completely does not understand the process.
Mick Whelan had been unfair in putting the chances of a deal at zero. Do you frankly think that some of the union leaders are acting in good faith? Are they playing to the cameras a bit, do you think?
No, I think it's not helpful if either they or I personalise it. I want to focus on the substance. And the reason why I said I thought he was being a bit unfair was just because things have moved on. An offer has now been made. So that he may not like the offer and he may want it to be more or whatever, but an offer has been made, so we have made some progress. There's something...
Yeah, you made an offer that was a pile of fucking shite. You knew they were going to reject. Don't be stupid.
Now for his union to...
He's either being really stupid or he's a damn fucking liar. I wonder which he is. But then... non-absolutist thinking here, he could be both.
Talk about with the train operating companies. So I think we need to make some progress.
I asked the question about good faith because it feels to me like the union leaders are saying that you are not acting in good faith. I just want to have a look at what Mick Lynch at the RMT said at the committee today. He suggested you deliberately let the strikes go ahead over Christmas. He said they let the strikes go ahead over Christmas. They didn't lift the telephone or lift a finger to get them off. He's implying, isn't he, that you deliberately let the strikes go ahead over Christmas to try and...
It's not an implication. He's not implying it. He's saying that's what they did. It's not an implication.
Turn public opinion against industrial action.
No, not at all. Look, I was very clear because I was interviewed by a number of media organisations before Christmas, and I was very clear. I'd facilitated offers to go to the trade unions. I wanted them to sit down with the employers, talk through those details, look at the reform package, and try and get to a solution and not have the strikes. Those strikes were not just damaging for the workers that lost income, but they were enormously inconvenient for not just for people going to work and important appointments, but the hospitality sector.
What'd you say? Inconvenience. That's what a lot of this is complaining about. Inconvenience.
For example, reckon that it cost them about £2.5 billion in lost revenue. So if I could have avoided the strikes happening, I would have done. If I could have done some more to do that, I would have done so. But I did what I could do.
You could have not, not chucked in fucking bullshit into the deal hours before the RDG was going to go to the unions. You fucking prick.
Which is to make sure that we had some offers on the table for the unions and the employers to talk about them. And I'm pleased that that's what they're now doing.
It's completely disingenuous.
And I hope that we can make some progress.
There's another thing that I struggle to get my head around, frankly. Right. Is it right that the Department for Transport still pays out money to the train operating companies during strike action? So even if there's no service, they still get the money from the taxpayer?
Well, look, the way it works post-COVID is that effectively, we don't have the franchising model anymore. We have a system where the railway companies are paid, by my department to operate the service that exists.
Because the question is, if that is the case, then they haven't really got any incentive to reach a deal, have they? They're going to get their money, whatever happens. It doesn't matter to them if there's strikes or not.
Well, they get paid to run the service, but they do want to solve these problems, and ultimately, I want to solve these problems because your viewers may not realise this, but since COVID, the taxpayer has put a fortune into the railways.
The taxpayer is still putting billions.
This is the point, right? It's not like it's going into the train infrastructure, the railway infrastructure. It's going straight into the fucking profits. It's going straight to shareholders. At least a large portion of it is. It's absolutely ridiculous.
Even if there's no train?
Yes, no, absolutely, and it's
why don't you stop that?
But it's one of the reasons, though, why we need to settle these disputes. But we have to settle them in the way that's fair, both for the passenger, who is interested in how much their fares are and whether their trains are reliable, but also the taxpayer. There isn't a bottomless pit of taxpayers' money.
I'm keen to talk to you a bit about the NHS as well, because obviously the transport is not the only sector where strikes are going ahead. We've seen a lot.
It's funny how the Tories like to differentiate between government and public money, even though there's no fucking difference at all.
The strikes in the NHS as well, nurses, ambulance workers as well. We'll be talking to Pat Cullen of the Royal College of Nursing after this interview. What's your message to her?
Well, look, I think two things. First of all, in the NHS, we have a way of dealing with pay, which is through these independent pay review bodies. And the government sets out its position. The unions are able to put evidence to them. And last year's pay review body, we accepted in full, so that you've got nurses have got at least a £1,400 pay rise.
We play this game. We play this game for months now. You can overrule them if you want to, can't you?
Yeah, but we have a process on purpose, so that.
But it's not even independent. You set the mandate to which to how much they can actually pay people. So it's a complete fallacy. Not only that, but the unions are rejecting it. The bigger unions are rejecting it. A lot of them don't even want to recognise it anymore.
It isn't just about politics. So we've accepted those pay review bodies. And by the way, not every government in the past has always accepted them. We've accepted those.
Yeah, that's what we've not what every we've government done, has always accepted.
No, but they've tended to do less, not more. What we've done this week, which we thought was a helpful piece of transparency and discussion with the unions, was the pay review body. The Secretaries of State have got pay review bodies, wrote to the union leaders, met them to talk about the evidence that the government's going to put into those pay review bodies, to talk to the unions, to understand where there may be some common ground, and to look at what the pay review bodies are going to be doing for the coming financial year. And we thought that was helpful. But, ultimately.
But it doesn't help now, does it, prick? It really fucking doesn't help now. What a prick. Fucking liar.
The initial ask of the nursing union was a pay rise of RPI plus 5%. That was close on 19%.
They rode back on that.
Yeah, but coming up with a very large number and then saying you'll meet someone halfway for something that's still an inflation-busting pay rise, it isn't affordable for the taxpayer.
Well, they're saying that around 10%.
But it's affordable for you to keep shoveling money into these train services and private services, not services, private companies and whatnot, and shoveling money to your donors.
Which is around inflation.
Yeah, but it's not affordable for the taxpayer. And it's way more, by the way, than is the average in the private sector, which is more in the 4 or 5% space. So, we've got to be fair to public service workers.
That's not fair on the private sector workers either. They should be getting more. What needs to happen is a redistribution of wealth. I don't like to be so absolute, but yeah. Wealth redistribution is fucking needed.
Value nurses, which is why we gave them a pay rise when there was a freeze in the public sector, but it's also got to be fair for the people.
You call it a pay rise, but it was still in real terms a pay cut. It's fucking ridiculous.
People that are paying their taxes in the private sector who are getting much smaller rises.
I have to ask you, we're seeing multiple strikes across different sectors. Almost every week there's a new strike. This is a government or a prime minister that is trying to model itself as, is all about competence.
Yeah.
And if you can't get a grip on these strikes, you're failing to avert them. Isn't that the definition of incompetence?
No, not at all. Look, what we're trying to do, and the Prime Minister set out his priorities last week, is about trying to halve inflation this year. Now, that doesn't happen magically by itself. It happens if you take sensible policy decisions. So look, the reason why there are more strikes is very straightforward. Inflation has been high, not entirely, but largely driven by Putin's war in Ukraine, which has driven up energy prices and food prices. That's had a knock-on effect. So I completely understand why people are feeling under pressure. But the problem is if the government then just embeds those higher pay rises in the system, we're not going to halve inflation this year. And if
what happened to a high-wage economy? So that was complete bullshit then. I've already said on this channel that I feel that we need to move towards the Scandinavian model, transition towards that kind of model anyway, a high tax, high wage, high tax economy. Just saying. They have one of the least amounts of inequality in the world.
we're still here next year with high inflation, we haven't helped anybody.
People are struggling to heat their family. If people are struggling to heat their homes, feed their families, you hear stories about nurses going to food banks. They're not going to be thinking about embedding, pay rises.
That's why we wanted to make fair pay rises, which is why we've accepted in full the pay review body recommendations.
The unions and the members are saying that they aren't fair. They keep running back to this, but it's a futile effort, mate.
Done that. That's also why that we've got a package of support for people to help them with high energy prices. So we accept that people need help, but you've got to balance it. And ultimately, we want to get to the position where we've halved inflation, we've driven it down, growing the economy, and then
inflation's going to come down by itself by over half anyway. Don't anybody be fooled by that bullshit. They're not going to bring it down. It's not the Tories bringing it down. It's coming down by itself.
People will actually be and feel better off, and I think that's where we want to get to.
No, they won't. They actually won't.
At the end of this year?
Just finally, because we are out of time, Rishi Sunak confirmed that he has used private healthcare in the past. He won't give us a time period, so we don't know if it was 10 years ago or 10 days ago. Should we care?
Well, I think the most important thing is whether he's doing the right thing for the NHS. He comes from an NHS family. His dad was a GP, his mum was a pharmacist, and I judge him by what he does, and he's put the autumn statement, when we had tough decisions to take, we put a significant amount of extra resources into health and social care to deliver on the ground.
I guess that's maybe what some people's concern is, though. Will he do the right thing?
These words of significant amount. Just how significant is it? If it's not enough, then it's not significant.
By the NHS, if we've seen these huge waiting times for ambulances, for A&E, for operations, for GP appointments. People may not trust that he's going to do the right thing if he doesn't understand what it's like for most people.
Well, look, I think he does, and that's why if you look at his priorities he set out last week, one of them was about those waits for elective operations, the operations that are planned, which is why we've almost got rid of anybody who's waiting for 2 years in that post-pandemic backlog. We're hoping to get that down to by March, we'll have got rid of anybody waiting more than 18 months, and then the plan is by next spring we'll have got rid of anybody having to wait for more than a year. But at the same time, we're putting more resources in place to deal with accident and emergency, to get people out of hospital who don't need to be there, into social care. That's why the Secretary of State set out £500 million, another £250 million announced this week. So I think you judge the government on what it's doing. We're focusing on accident and emergency, we're focusing on elective recovery post-pandemic. And I think that's how the Prime Minister will be judged. He set those priorities out clearly in his speech last week.
Years.
Okay, thank you very much.
Pleasure.
This was a problem before. This was a problem that that we knew was going to happen.
Join us at St George's.
This was a problem that we knew was going to happen before the pandemic.
Talking to me just a little bit earlier this evening, and listening to that interview here with us now is Pat Cullen, who is the General Secretary of the Royal College of Nursing, of course, whose members are due to walk out and strike again on this time for 2 days next week. Thank you very much for being with us. I know you were listening to the Transport Secretary there. What did you make of what he was saying?
Unfortunately, it came across as just the same rhetoric, which has become really tired and is certainly not moving the discussions on for our nursing staff. And we are a matter of state.
General Secretary of the Royal College of Nursing. I knew I got the name wrong.
Is now before the next 2 days of action. And so the rhetoric...
Labour leader Sir Keir Starmer has said if the PM had negotiated with the nurses and ambulance workers, they would not be on strike. Boom.
To change, they need to get around a table and start to have...
Just because Starmer's not going out on the picket lines doesn't mean he doesn't have support with the strikers or the unions. Don't be fucking absolutistly stupid.
Negotiations, proper, meaningful negotiations with me on behalf of those nurses. And, coming out with the same staff saying they value nurses, and again, the absolute overemphasis about the pay review body, which seems to have become seriously more important to them than fixing the crisis in the health service and protecting the health service and actually getting a resolution to the strike.
I guess the argument that Mr Harper was making is that the pay rises would be unaffordable. He says, firstly, because it would embed higher pay rises in the system, so stoking inflation, and also saying that in the private sector, people are getting pay rises of just 4% to 5%, so it's unaffordable and unfair for taxpayers.
Well, that's I'm not saying that he's not telling the truth, but factually that's not right. We
sounds like you are saying telling the truth.
We
I get these people have to try and be. I understand from what I've heard over many months now of watching these sort of things that people aren't supposed to be sort of front, which is why Mick Lynch was such a breath of fresh air. This is probably why I get in trouble, because I'd be like, no, he's a fucking liar. Probably wouldn't be asked to come back on again, but yeah, I'd be like, no, this is fucking lying, prick.
We carried out, got independent economists to carry out a very comprehensive economic study comparing pay rises within the public sector, particularly for nurses, against those in the private sector. And it became abundantly clear within the report that the private sector pay has increased significantly with pay rises and pay increases that have certainly been almost looking enviously at them within the health service.
You would say that he's effectively cherry-picking the figures then, just looking at the last year rather than looking back over many years.
Yes, and I think that's not the right thing to do in the current crisis that we find ourselves in.
You originally asked for a 19% rise. Now you're saying that's just a starting point. So are you willing to compromise and to come down on that then?
Well, look, I think it
was always a number that was going to be negotiated on. This was the figure that they'd had. It wasn't arbitrary. This was mathematically figured out.
For saying that we had never put a 19% figure on it. However, we did certainly set out our policy position as 5% above the rate of inflation. At the time that we obviously agreed the policy position, inflation wasn't where it was in the current times. However, everyone knows that the college and myself as the General Secretary has not just extended an olive branch, but in fact I think we've leaned the whole tree in at this stage to say, meet us halfway, get us round a negotiating table. I set out my stall for the 300,000 plus nurses that took part in this ballot. They can do the same, and let's find a way through the current crisis that we find ourselves in.
So meeting halfway, would it be fair to assume around the 10% mark?
Look,
that's what you've been reported as.
I really wish these reporters would stop trying to fish out these numbers. The General Secretaries of the unions and the bosses and the government have all come out and said, you know, we shouldn't really be talking about numbers, despite the fact they'll go and fucking have a go about the 19%. It's ridiculous.
Can't negotiate.
They know they can't come on and say the figures that they're negotiating at, because that would be unfaithful to the negotiations. They know this, but they still keep asking the damn questions. It's fucking stupid.
I said time and time again, I'm not going to negotiate on the airwaves. I can't negotiate at a table on my own. The only table I can negotiate at is a table with the Prime Minister or with the Secretary of State. And I would urge them again, a matter of days from the next strike, to please do that for every single member of nursing staff that absolutely deserve to be heard, not talked about on the airwaves by the Prime Minister, by the Secretary of State, but talk to them through at a table with me. They owe that to nursing, but they owe it to patients.
As you say, strike action just a matter of days away now. We heard the train drivers union saying that the chances of a deal he would put at zero to call off his strikes. Would you put yours any higher?
Like every single nurse listening to this programme now and listening over this last months, we live in optimism that something that at some stage that sense will be brought to these discussions by this government. So I'm not going to sit here and lose hope. There's hope for the next number of days that we can get to a table and that we can start negotiating. I'm in communication with the Secretary of State. I'm hopeful that the next time him and I find ourselves at a table, that the discussion will be different, and that we will start to talk realistically about how we can bring things to a conclusion.
You say you have optimism. Is there any reason for that optimism? Has anything changed? The tone, the messaging, or is there anything behind it?
Well, we certainly had optimism after listening to the Prime Minister over the weekend. And on that basis, yes, we thought, look, there must be something that can be addressed for 22-23 pay for our nursing staff, because that's where the dispute is. Unfortunately, as time went on through the week, we heard on the media that there were some discussions about one-off payments and a backdated payment, but those have never been put to me either formally or informally. But it's the wrong place to have those discussions. They owe it to nursing staff to get around a table and have those discussions with me formally.
Would either of those things, I know you don't want to negotiate on the airways, but could you see a deal forming around those principles?
Whatever is put to me needs to be significant. That's the first thing. It needs to have long-term thinking behind it, and it needs to have long-term investment. And one-off, ill-thought-through payoffs isn't going to do this. But look, let's get to a negotiating table and let's start to really fundamentally talk about what will resolve the strike for our nursing staff.
So it sounds like a one-off payment wouldn't cut it, but how about looking at the next pay review 2023 onwards?
Let's get to a table and let's have a conversation.
Understood. How long could the strikes last for?
Until we get a resolution for our nursing staff that so deserve it. Every single member of our nursing profession deserves more. They deserve better, and they don't deserve to be treated like this by this government. They are saying clearly to me on a daily basis that this government has turned their back on them. A profession that carried us through the pandemic and long before it. The nursing profession is in crisis as a consequence of how they've been treated. We have long waiting lists. The health service, it's well documented, is in crisis. The only way to resolve the crisis in the health service is to actually retain and recruit our brilliant nurses that we have got, keep them and recruit more in. And that can only be done by this government sitting down and talking to me.
But you're saying that you'll keep going with strike action until you get what you want?
I believe our nursing staff will. They believe that this is their opportunity to speak up on behalf of their patients and try and do something to address the staffing levels. 47,000 vacant posts in this country alone, and every single nurse coming on duty night and day feel that. But more importantly, our patients feel it. So this is our time to speak up and have our voice heard on behalf of our patients, and that's what every nurse is trying to do now.
This is a really difficult question to ask you, but I am interested on your opinion on it. Do you feel that the strike action is putting lives at risk?
Well, we heard from the Royal College of Emergency Medicine, but I think every nurse knows this, that there are unnecessary deaths as a consequence of the NHS crisis. It's not our nursing staff that are putting patients' lives at risk, most certainly not. And I think the Secretary of State actually admitted himself that on the days of strike action, the Royal College of Nursing delivered that action with a very safe and steady hand, and there was nothing reckless about how we managed to do that. We exempted emergency and urgent care services from our strike. We'll continue to do that. We will do nothing that will add any further risk or any further unsafe care to our patients. That's what we're about, and that's what we'll continue to do.
Which is in direct contradiction to what a lot of the fucking bollocks coming at the government.
What kind of things are nurses seeing in the NHS right now? Just give it as a sense of how you see the state of the NHS.
The NHS, and I've been a nurse for 42 years, and I speak to our profession every single day. They would say that it was difficult difficult being a word that I'm using lightly during the pandemic, but it's nothing like it is now. It's absolutely worse now.
Worse than during the pandemic.
They are working in an incredibly fragile, critical state every single day with a very depleted workforce, but they themselves are emotionally, psychologically and physically depleted, having gone through 2 years of the pandemic. They are working excessive hours, very, very long hours, in very unsafe conditions.
Unsafe, so people are dying unnecessarily as well.
Well, we've heard from the Royal College of Emergency Medicine that people are dying unnecessarily. That's not the way we want our patients to be treated. It's not how the people of this country should be treated. And we ought to be doing better. We ought to be doing delivering a health service that actually is the envy of the world. But unfortunately, I believe this government has not just let patients down and our profession down, but actually they're letting the NHS down.
Thank you very much indeed. Good to talk to you today. Pat Cullen there of the Royal College of Nurses. Always good to have you here. Well, a little later we will get Labour's take, but first let's get the thoughts of our chief political correspondent John Craig, shall we? It's interesting, isn't it? You know, the interview there with Pat Cullen and other interviews that we've done in the past few weeks with NHS leaders. It does feel, doesn't it, like there is a real concern about the state of the NHS. What's your reaction to the interviews that we've had so far?
Well, first of all, Mr. Harper was talking about a change of tone since he became Secretary of State for Transport. And then minutes later, Pat Cullen says, same old rhetoric. So the change of tone has made no difference. Now, just on Mr. Harper, first of all, I thought you had him on rather dodgy ground when you challenged him on the fact that these train operating companies are still getting these subsidies from the government, despite the fact they're not running trains. His message clearly was that he wanted the unions to put he used the word neutral a couple of times to put the various offers to the members rather than recommend that they reject them. And then when you moved on to the NHS, well, he started trotting out the Prime Minister's 5 pledges. He mentioned halving inflation.
I like the way that this guy comes out with the way he words things. It's quite funny.
A couple of times, and then he mentioned falling waiting lists, which are the Prime Minister, two of the Prime Minister's 5 pledges. So obviously, we know he was very much a Sunak supporter during the summer. But as I say, different tone perhaps, but same old message. It looks like. And what was really interesting from Pat Cullen was that she absolutely appeared to rule out this idea of £1,000 bonus or whatever the figure is. She said, no, that's no good. I mean, the Labour Party would call that sticking plaster. That's a phrase we've heard from them a few times this week from Keir Starmer and Wes Streeting. My understanding is that was a suggestion I think was put to Steve Barclay by one of the other unions. It might have been Unison, I'm not entirely sure. But it looks as though that's a non-starter. And it looks also, from what we hear, it looks as though that the Prime Minister and the Chancellor have ruled that anyway. So here we are, in the second week of January, and we haven't really moved on since before Christmas.
Yeah, it does really feel, doesn't it? Like having the two interviews back to back, how far apart the sides are as well. It's always nice, while we have you, John, to kind of like pick out some of the moments of the week. And there was a photograph, isn't it, that we thought that we would show. I mean, it's absolutely incredible. So here's the first photograph. You can see there, Boris Johnson, part of
Boris Johnson, Grant Shapps.
Place. Let's have a quick look at the second one. Where's he gone, John?
Where's he gone?
Oh, I heard about this. Yeah, the photoshopped image. This is actually quite funny. Like I said, I'll be putting the link up for the video that I'm watching now. At the end, I'll be up on the end video, so you can see it yourselves. But it's like, yeah, it's so blatantly obvious.
Like Stalin did to his opponents. I mean, the irony of this is the week, this appeared on the day that Boris Johnson began his comeback tour with his speech at the Carlton Club, where they were unveiling a portrait of him. Yeah, I mean, Mr. Shapps, we saw in the House of Commons. Yeah, there he is. There's Grant Shapps. Stand back a bit. Unveiling this very controversial bill on minimum services. Took questions from MPs for about an hour and a half or a couple of hours, I think it was. But anyway, yeah, I mean, that's the space rocket, the one in down in Cornwall. I think that was a year or so ago, that photo. Yeah, but there's a gap. It just looks ridiculous, doesn't it? I mean, but
social distancing still happening.
I mean, some MPs will say, well, this is typical Grant Shapps because he's got a bit of form for being a bit. Well, should we say...
Careful what we say, John. I'm just going to jump in there. I'm going to jump in. But what a great moment of the week. Mr. Shapps says he was...
John Craig's hilarious. I don't think he likes the Tories.
Aware of any editing that went on. I'm just going to leave. Right, I'm going to walk away. Well, we heard from the Transport Secretary for the government a little earlier. Thank you very much, John. And his shadow, Louise Hay, joins us now for Labour's take on the ongoing strikes crisis across the public sector and transport network. I know you were tweeting about the Grant Shapps photo earlier this week as well.
It's the most Grant Shapps thing that's ever happened. You've taken the photo down. My favourite thing was that he actually forgot to Photoshop out Boris Johnson's elbow. That was still showing in the photo.
On to more serious matters. The rail strikes. What did you make of Mark Harper's interview? I don't know if you caught much of it.
Well, I think it's incredibly frustrating that here we are 6 months after the strikes have started. This dispute has been rumbling on for all these months, and we're still hearing the same old rhetoric from the Transport Secretary. They started when Grant Shapps was still my opposite number, and even back then when they started, it was clear to everyone in the industry and in the public that nothing could happen with this dispute, that the operators and Network Rail couldn't lift a finger without the Transport Secretary or the Treasury's influence, and these negotiations simply can't be brought to a resolution until the Transport Secretary does his job, grows up, and sits down at the negotiating table with the operators. Because as you rightly pointed out, post-COVID, we now have this system where operators get a fixed fee regardless of whether their trains run. So they have absolutely no incentive whatsoever to settle this dispute.
So what exactly, because what Mark Harper is doing is talking to them, right? Which is what Grant Shapps didn't do, but Mark Harper is actually now talking to the union bosses. So what would you do differently? You know, if you were the Transport Secretary, if you were sitting down around the table, what happens then?
Well, look, we've got a better tone from Mark Harper than Grant Shapps. There's no doubt about that. But there's worlds apart from getting in the unions for a cup of tea in the Department for Transport and actually sitting down and doing the hard graft of negotiation.
So what is your starting point from a negotiation then?
Well, the negotiation is about a whole raft of things. We've got pay, we've got conditions, we've got jobs, and that needs to be done actually as part of a wider conversation about reform in the rail industry. And that's part of the problem. That's part of the reason why the dispute is rumbling on longer than it should, because it's happening in this completely unreformed and quite frankly failing rail system where operators are being given a fee regardless of whether their trains run, and you've got a system where the likes of Avanti and Transpennine Express are not delivering the service that are required of them, not investing in the workforce as they have been asked to do time and time again over very many years, and it's a feature and a failure of the very short-term nature of the rail industry. So Labour have a plan to bring our railways back into public ownership, to reform the system, to put passengers back at the heart, and frankly reset industrial relations so we can bring this cycle of very disruptive disputes to an end.
You obviously do want reform with the nationalisation project, but my understanding is that would only happen when contracts expire, so we'll be some years away, even if Labour do get into power. So I'm kind of interested in the here and now. Do you think that rail fares are too expensive right now?
Well, rail fares have risen far faster than wages over the last 10 years. They've risen faster than fuel as well. So the rail is unaffordable for far too many people.
If it is unaffordable, then what would you do? Because at the minute, you know, the people working on the railways want more money. They're resisting reforms that would, for example, lead to driver operated trains, which would potentially reduce costs as well. And obviously there is this taxpayer subsidy as well that you've raised points about. So where does the savings come if you want to make rail fare more cheap?
Well, there needs to be investment in the rail service. It's undeniable, and the fact that there was investment through COVID to keep it going doesn't deny the fact that there are issues with pay. Now, you know, there needs to be that wider reform, and actually the vast majority of franchises will come up in the first for expiration in the first term of a Labour government. A lot are already being run by the operator of last resort, so it's not the case that this would be very far in the future. There needs to be that widespread reform. And the fact is, the amount...
I like here how Louise Hay has challenged what Sophie Ridge is, the line, the Tory line that Sophie Ridge has been spouted here, and turned it on its head. No, it's not going to be in the future. You know, years in the future. It's going to be within the next within the first Parliament of a Labour government. So try again.
That they wanted to say through the workplace reforms that they're trying to push through have already been far eclipsed from the damage that these strikes have done to the economy over the last 6 months. So the intransigence and the ham-fisted approach that this government has taken to this dispute is costing the economy and the entire rail industry dear.
Just finally, should we care if the Prime Minister's had private healthcare?
I mean, we want the Prime Minister to be honest about it, which he failed to be at the weekend and only just corrected today. But I think what it gets to the heart of is because the NHS is in such crisis, because we have record waiting lists with over 7 million people waiting for healthcare, it has effectively created a two-tier health system, which means that a lot of people aren't able to access healthcare, aren't able to access a GP appointment and can't get into A&E. And it does mean that the well-off can afford private healthcare. And if that's the case with the Prime Minister, then he should be honest about it. And it does reveal something that he isn't necessarily experiencing, the very poor healthcare that a lot of people across the country are.
Okay, thank you very much for being on the programme. Lou Haig there speaking to us. You're watching The Take. We are live in Westminster for you this evening. Up next, the SNP says a Sky News special investigation into money in politics means there must be reform. We'll bring you our latest special report from the Westminster accounts.
When I started my business in 2000...
Bloody adverts.
To Westminster, you're watching The Take. Now, the Scottish National Party is calling for a complete overhaul of MPs' outside earnings and donations. That's after a Sky News investigation shone a light on money in Westminster. Our Deputy Political Editor, Sam Coates, spoke to the party's Westminster leader, Stephen Flynn.
if we have, for instance, or for example, an MP who is receiving money from an organisation and someone cannot immediately determine who has donated that money to that organisation, that has got to ring alarm bells for everyone. Alarm bells for what is the motives for that person wanting that organisation wanting to give money to the MP. What is the quid pro quo for doing so? Because money isn't just given freely. Let's not be daft here.
Did a video on not common grounds, a great debate around this. Okay, now one of the things that came up in that I liked was this idea. I'm sure I did a video on it actually. I think I should. I like the idea. If you watch the Great Debate, the most recent one, an idea came up with capping the contributions that parties and MPs get when especially not exclusively, but especially in terms of when it comes to a general election. Because the Tories get substantially more money than all the other parties. So I do wonder.
And ultimately what we need to see in respect of that is a complete overhaul of it. That shouldn't be allowed to happen.
Stephen Flynn pretty clear there, and the chair of one of Westminster's ethics watchdogs has told Sky News that the ability of lobbying firms to influence MPs through informal groups in Parliament could be, in his words, the next big scandal in politics. Now, all party parliamentary groups, or APPGs, very snappy, are groups of MPs and peers who share an interest. The Westminster Accounts Project from Sky News and Tortoise Media has revealed that APPGs have received over £20 million worth of funding from external organisations just since the last election. Now, the funding is legal as long as it's declared and there is no undue political lobbying attached. Our Deputy Political Editor, Sam Coates, has this exclusive report.
Qatar, welcoming the world. But long before the fans arrived, came the MPs. Dozens visited the country before the World Cup, and Sky News' Westminster Accounts Project can reveal the Qatari government spent over £240,000 in hosting them. MPs insist their visits were purely educational, but this part of a system that, some say, is all about persuasion.
Don't like it.
All-party parliamentary groups, where MPs from all sides can come together around shared interests and issues. They do research, make visits and publish reports. Loosely regulated, they have no official status in Parliament, but they're a big part of the Westminster system, and what they say carries weight.
MPs are calling for a review of the use of so-called smart motorways.
He now says he'll be starting a new group of MPs to push that further.
Sort out our drugs laws.
British parliamentarians are worried the Saudi package won't meet UK travel regulations.
MPs want the manufacturer to make amends.
Vigorous pressure being exerted on companies who frankly have got away with murder.
Huge influence in the public debate, but what happens?
Isn't this what we want MPs to do? Especially to come, from across the House, especially on, subjects like as we just heard. Don't we want that kind of thing?
Behind closed doors, whether you're lobbying for a bank, a religion, or a nation state. APPGs might not be well known, but they are big business. £20 million has been funneled into them over the course of this Parliament alone. Most of that goes on paying for organisers, reports, research, events and trips. And there are plenty of these APPGs.
Trips had the biggest portion.
APPGs to put money into 753 active groups. That's more of them than there are sitting members of Parliament. And these are the ones that are getting the most.
Fair Business Banking, it's over 500,000, nearly 600,000. Left behind neighbourhoods, 487,500. Christians in Parliament. Where's pagans in Parliament? Fuck you, Christians in Parliament. Anyway, they get 441 grand and £6. Internet communications and tech, 383,799 £799. Anti-corruption and responsible tax, 334 grand, 334.5 grand. Artificial intelligence, 330 grand and £4. Coronavirus, 319.5 grand. Housing market and housing delivery, 307.5 grand. What they fucking doing? Carbon monoxide, just under 300 grand. Longevity, just over 275 grand.
Money. So many different subjects covered here in just the top 5. Banking, Christianity, levelling up, tech, and...
Right. I'm not going to take people fucking having a go at me about my bitching about Christians anymore. You can fuck off. Christians are still exerting a hell of a lot of influence in our parliament, in our government. What about the rest of us? What about us pagans for a fucking start? Why are we not up there? I wonder fucking why. Christians won't want us there.
Artificial intelligence. There's an APPG for every sector and every cause.
Not only that, but they get the third largest amount. And then you had them bitching earlier this year, or late last year, whichever calendar you use. They were bitching about, oh no, the Christians are lower numbers in the UK now, we're a minority. Shut the fuck up!
And this is where the money's coming from. Names you've probably never heard of.
Policy Connect. over £1.5 million. What the fuck? Connect Communications, just under £1 million. Health Comms Consulting, just under 700 grand. College Green Group, just over 600, or just under 650 grand. Athena Foundation, roughly the same amount. Big Innovation Centre, well, that's an inventive name. Just under 500 grand. Local Trust, just under 500 grand. Three Line Sport, 379 grand. Parliamentary Christian Trust. See, again, the fucking Christian. And you, again, oh, they can fuck off. Damn fucking Christians can piss off. Oh, please worry about us. No, fuck yourselves. Tendo they get just under 300 grand. Tendo Consulting, just over 250 grand. Ministry of Foreign Affairs in Qatar, 220 grand.
But what they say they do is revealing. Of the top 10, 6 of these companies are registered for lobbying, and many others have a clear agenda. So much of life in Westminster is lobbying, the art of persuasion central to politics, and APPGs can provide a rich canvas. It takes just 5 MPs to set one up, and companies can fund them directly, giving to a group that matches their cause, or they can give cash via a lobbying group. It's their job to convince politicians and governments to do what they want, but it's not always easy to get them to speak on camera. So when I was offered the chance to chair an event on lobbying in Parliament, I couldn't possibly say no.
We've got a brilliant panel here tonight to talk through that.
A room of lobbyists making the case that they can be a force for good. They see APPGs as a powerful tool.
I know our APPG helped influence getting more money for Northern Culture in the Levelling Up, Levelling Up Fund. We did that. We know that with net zero. We know the action plan, the 2030 target was reduced because of what we said. We think that, but it was had influence, and that's bringing that group together. It's really effective.
But finding it hard to defend the system. Some people worry that APPGs are used through the secretariats, the sort that you run, in order to push particular corporate agendas. Is that true?
I think it might be true. I think
it's true.
Probably.
I don't like to be absolute, but it's true.
Most groups do things or operate the way we do.
I think there are a minority of APPGs that are funded by certain organisations who are peddling their line. And they are trying to unfairly influence parliamentary decisions.
There are too many of them, it's too easy to set them up. Where there's a potential problem is in the lack of transparency on funding, the lack of transparency on their objectives, and the lack of transparency on how they behave within Parliament.
Can you name some examples or give some scenarios where there's an issue?
No.
Why not?
No fucking grass.
There are 650 to choose from, so...
But you think there are issues, that you know that there are issues with some of them because they're not doing what they say on the tin, they're actually tools of individual corporate vested interests, and there's no way of stopping it?
I won't say that.
Do you think there's unethical behaviour with APPGs at the moment? It's not a no.
That was
a stark warning from one of the government's top ethics watchdogs.
I think this is the next big scandal unless we take action. Well, a number of them are, the Secretariat comes from professional organisations, from lobbying groups.
Chair of ACOBA, Lord Pickles. I heard of this fucker. Lord Pickles. I don't know why, I can't remember why I've heard Lord Pickles, but...
Organisations that have a particular axe to grind. And I don't think there is sufficient transparency in terms of why they're doing it.
There are clear examples of a business putting its money into an APPG to try and influence policy. The CBD APPG are funded by a single company with a specific interest. Tenacious Labs open that easing cannabis regulations is the company's goal. But they say it's the MPs who call the shots.
What you have to do is you have to persuade some MPs or officers, officers there, 5 of them, that it's of sufficient interest to them, that if you do a bunch of grunt work to supply them with the heavy lifting, that they're prepared to spend some time on it. And it's their APPG, not ours, and they make that very clear as we go along, providing them with sensible first drafts for a discussion to happen around. And that's our job. We work for the APPG. We don't, we're not the tail wagging the dog.
Millions of pounds going into a largely unregulated part of the political system. Many all-party groups work to inform and educate, but even those who work at the heart of them admit they could be open to abuse. The Westminster accounts makes it easier to follow the money.
Just one of the Sam Coates reports there from the Westminster Accounts project, where the SNP calling for reform. We will wait and see if that happens. Now, of course, the state of the NHS and strikes across the public sector have been a really big issue for us on the programme today. So let's speak to our viewers panel, shall we? Because I'm actually very interested to hear about what people's experience with the health services. We often hear the worst case stories, don't we? But let's find out what people are experiencing themselves. Let's go to Stella first, shall we? Stella, I understand you had physio on the NHS recently. How was the service?
Hello? Oh.
Can you hear us, Stella? Stella, if you can hear me, I'm just asking you about how your recent experience with the NHS was. I think we're struggling there. Let's go to Izar instead. We'll try and get back to Stella recently. Izar, now I know that you were telling our producer Jared that some of your friends work as junior doctors on the NHS. What kind of thing are they telling you about?
Yeah, I think the situation with the NHS is a really extreme situation. I think some of the estimates even 300 people that died today, just because of the end.
You can barely, like, this.
I think one.
The sound quality is not through, isn't my problem. This is really bad.
My friend said they've considered going time to pot instead locum, because that control over that.
We need subtitles for you, man. Like, we need subtitles for it.
Symptomatic system.
So I'm just going to jump in because you're. I caught a bit of that, but I'll be honest, the sound was dropping in and out a little bit for us. But interesting to hear what we did catch anyway. Right, let's go to Mike, shall we? Let's hope, fingers crossed, that we're going to get like a little bit better as the panel goes on. Always some technical gremlins around, but we'll just ride with it. This is what the take's all about. It's fine. Mike, you used the NHS on Christmas Eve, I believe, didn't you? Always a busy time for the NHS. What was your experience like?
In most ways, it was quite a long wait total from the time we contact to the time I actually
shame. There's like there's
scan to
some kind of
diagnose what's going.
Yeah.
But I have to say,
all till after this, unfortunately.
I'm so sorry.
Because
NHS. I have to say, John, the more
I had fast forward past that because that connection to all of them seemed to be bad.
I talk to people in the NHS, whether it is, the Society of Acute Medicine, whether it's Pat Cullen tonight, they're all saying the same thing, which is this is even worse than the peak of the COVID pandemic.
And one of the problems, in fact, Mr. Barclay, the Health Secretary, acknowledged this, is the strain on hospitals and A&E departments is the fact that people can't get to see a GP. Now, I don't know if you've rung a GP surgery recently, but my wife rings the GP. Who was it? It's Keir Starmer at Prime Minister's Questions, I think, talked about Mr. Sunak trying to ring at 8 a.m. My wife does it. And you hear on the phone, you are number 30-something in the queue or something. There was a story a few days ago about a GP who was working from home in Cornwall. And her practice, I think, was in London, but she obviously had a holiday home. I mean, I think one of the things the government's got to get a grip on is the GP service, which seems to have collapsed, putting strain on A&E departments. Now, the government continues to blame the pandemic. Obviously, there's a backlog because of that. But it has. I mean, there's some horror stories. And we hear MPs in the House of Commons. Angela Rayner raised one yesterday, I think, about one of her constituents. And we hear every day almost some poor person who's died because they've had to wait so long. And but I suppose what was quite depressing tonight was the fact that Pat Cullen completely rejected the idea of what some people are calling a compromise to try and sort out the nurses' dispute, when she said, no, one-off payment's no good. So, another interesting moment in the Commons this week that really caught my ear was that when it was Mr. Barclay and was up against Wes Streeting for Labour, Wes Streeting absolutely tore into him during a statement on, was it Monday or Tuesday? Monday, I think. And then from right behind him in the Commons chamber, the veteran Tory MP, Edward Lee, said, well, hold on a minute, other countries have had COVID and so on. He mentioned some European countries, and I think Canada was another one as well. They're not having these problems. And he says, what's our plan? Why haven't we got a plan? We can't leave it to the Labour Party, said Sir Edward Lee.
It's really interesting, isn't it? Because you talked about Wes Streeting as well and GP surgeries. And it does feel at the minute that it's Labour who is perhaps talking a bit more radically on the NHS, and that the GP shouldn't be the only gatekeeper. For example, self-referrals, pharmacies, there should be other ways of accessing healthcare.
Yeah. And yet at Prime Minister's Questions today, Rishi Sunak, who I thought actually was put in quite a combative performance today, he really attacked Labour's plan, said it was uncosted and so on.
It's really interesting. That does feel like that is where the political debate is going this year. John, thanks for stepping in. Always great to speak to you. John Craig there on The Take. Well, that's it for this week's.
And that's it from me on this video. Yeah, like, the Tory bullshit is getting worse. And the media, I don't really watch BBC so much. The Politics Live is the only real, and Question Time are the only real ones. I don't watch BBC News. Not really. I tend to watch Sky News or TLDR. But, you know, John Craig, it's just hilarious. I swear that guy is anti-Tory. This Westminster accounts thing is also very interesting. I'd like to hear people's thoughts on it, if you're willing. So yeah, this has been One Angry Pagan, and you saw me getting angry about Christianity. This is going to happen. If you get insulted by it, then don't watch me. Fuck off. I don't care. I had enough of Christians trying to play the crying game despite all the societal and cultural abuses. Can fuck right off. There. End of little rant. This has been Shadow Eater, One Angry Pagan, and I do hope you come back to see more. Blessed Thursday, everyone. Have a good day.